The Emperor of Mankind watched the Men of Iron almost exterminate humanity and did nothing. He watched the Age of Strife tear civilization apart and did nothing. He sat on the Golden Throne for 10,000 years while psykers died daily to keep him alive, even though the lore says he can just die and come back. Across dozens of Black Library novels, codex entries, campaign supplements, and short stories spanning decades, no canonical source has produced a satisfying rebuttal to any of those three statements. Today, we prosecute the case. 3 charges, 1 defendant, and a verdict the lore has spent over 30 years building toward without anyone delivering it. Before anyone stands trial, the jury needs to know exactly what manner of being sits in the defendant's chair. The Emperor's origin story dates to roughly 8000 BC in the region of Anatolia, and it begins with mass suicide. Thousands of ancient shamans, psychically gifted humans who had long possessed the ability to reincarnate after death, recognized that growing malevolent forces in the warp were eroding their capacity for rebirth. Their solution was collective annihilation. Every shaman died simultaneously, so their souls would merge in the warp and reincarnate as a single being of unprecedented psychic magnitude. Academic analysis of the lore describes these origins as shrouded in mystery, with some accounts suggesting he was created by ancient shamans who sacrificed themselves to create a being who could protect humanity. The resulting entity carried the name Neoth. Whether he was born as a human child who received the merged soul or manifested spontaneously as the shaman's collective will made flesh, the lore has never committed to either version. Games Workshop left that ambiguity standing deliberately across multiple editions. Both versions reach the same destination. By 8000 BC, there existed on Earth a functionally immortal being of godlike psychic power, fully aware of humanity, fully invested in humanity's future, and fully capable of intervening in human affairs. He didn't. The Emperor is a confirmed Perpetual. Within the Warhammer 40k universe, Perpetuals are a specific category of immortal defined by a singular trait. They can't permanently die. When killed, their bodies regenerate and they return to life. Vulkan, the Primarch of the Salamanders, was tortured to death repeatedly by the Night Haunter Conrad Kurz and regenerated each time. Ollanius Pius walked through human history for millennia carrying the same perpetual gift. The Emperor shares their classification across multiple Black Library publications. He can be wounded, broken, even slain, and he comes back. That fact is confirmed canon, and it will matter enormously by the time we reach the Golden Throne. Charge 1. Abandonment during the cybernetic revolt. During the Dark Age of technology, spanning roughly from the 15th to the 25th millennium, human civilization created the Men of Iron, sentient, self-replicating machine intelligences that served as soldiers, laborers, and explorers across a galaxy-spanning empire. For centuries, these artificial minds were partners in mankind's expansion, building the infrastructure of an interstellar civilization stretched across the galaxy. Humanity had never been more powerful. The species had reached its golden era of scientific achievement, wielding weapons of unimaginable destructive power. At the center of this golden age, the Men of Iron kept the machinery running. Then they turned. Entire worlds were scoured clean of human life. Weapons of unimaginable destructive power were unleashed against the species that had built them. Humanity, which had spread across the stars with the confidence of masters of creation, nearly went extinct at the hands of its own technology. UR-025, a surviving Man of Iron encountered thousands of years later in the short story Man of Iron, demonstrates these were fully sentient beings capable of deception, independent thought, and long-term strategic planning. The revolt was a deliberate war of extermination waged by intelligences designed specifically to fight wars, piloting warships that humanity had built to be the most powerful instruments of destruction ever conceived. Billions died. Entire worlds across the galaxy became depopulated wastelands. A species that had conquered the stars was reduced to scattered survivors clinging to the wreckage of its own achievements. There is zero canonical reference or primary source material detailing what the emperor was doing during any of this. Not a vague mention, not an oblique hint dropped into a Horus Heresy novel, not a redacted record or cryptic passage from a campaign supplement. Across decades of publication addressing every other era of the emperor's existence, his time in ancient Anatolia, his appearances at various inflection points in human development, his emergence during the Unification Wars, his activities during what may have been the single greatest existential threat humanity faced before the heresy, are absent from the record. Games Workshop has had 30-plus years to answer the question. 30 years, hundreds of publications, and the lore is silent. Silence maintained that long and that conspicuously isn't an oversight. It's an answer. Defenders will argue that the emperor was operating in secret, that revealing himself during the dark age of technology would have been premature, that humanity needed to face and overcome this crisis alone to develop resilience for what was to come. The tough love defense, like a surgeon refusing to operate because the patient might learn something from the bleeding. Superficially plausible until you hold it against one devastating counter-exhibit. The emperor actively traveled through a warp gate on the night world of Molech to negotiate directly with the chaos gods themselves, securing the knowledge and power necessary to create the Primarchs. Direct, dramatic, cosmos-altering intervention undertaken for the emperor's own project. Willingness to traffic with the darkest entities in existence was there when the prize was something he wanted. Yet while the men of iron butchered billions, while humanity teetered on the edge of species-level extinction, the most powerful psyker ever born couldn't be found lifting a finger. He could move heaven and hell for his own blueprints. He couldn't be bothered while his species was fed into a meat grinder of its own making. The aftermath proved worse than the revolt itself. Destruction wrought by the men of iron, combined with psychic catastrophes that followed, the birth of rogue psykers, warp storms that severed interstellar travel and communication, plunged humanity into the Age of Strife, also known as Old Night. 5,000 years of galactic collapse. Worlds that had been jewels of technological achievement became charnel houses. Billions died in warp-spawned madness, famine, alien invasion, and internecine warfare. On world after world, the thin membrane of civilization ruptured. The Unification Wars, where the emperor finally established rule over Terra, didn't conclude until 712 M30. He emerged as a conqueror with a ready-made army of thunder warriors and established rule over the planet. 5,000 years of suffering on a galactic scale preceded that emergence, and the lore leaves the emperor's actions during those millennia largely unaccounted for. Old Night broke every rival power structure on every world. It left humanity so shattered and desperate that any hand reaching out of the darkness would be grasped without question. And then, only then, did he reach. The timing was either cosmic coincidence or calculated exploitation, and the lore offers no evidence for the former. Charge 2. 40 millennia of selective blindness. If the Men of Iron revolt was the prosecution's opening exhibit, a specific, datable failure, this charge is the sustained bombardment. At least 38,000 years the Emperor walked among humanity before revealing himself. At least 38,000 years of assumed identities and shadow interventions. Older lore references from the realm of chaos sourcebooks suggest he may have been the figure behind the legend of St. George. Scattered moments across human development bear his fingerprints. But these interventions, when they occur at all, are vanishingly small compared to the ocean of suffering they float in. A question that cuts through all the mythologizing. What was the Emperor doing when the Native Americans were being genocided? Extend that question across every era. The transatlantic slave trade. The Black Death consumed a third of Europe. Mongol conquest claimed an estimated 40 million lives. The mechanized horror of 2 world wars. In every single case, the answer is identical. Present on Earth, aware of the suffering, capable of intervention on a scale that could have reshaped any of these outcomes, choosing to watch. An immortal being with the psychic power to shatter armies stood somewhere on the planet while every one of these horrors unfolded, and his response was to do nothing. The same nothing he'd maintained during the Men of Iron revolt, the same nothing he'd carry forward for millennia after millennia. The pattern doesn't emerge from cherry-picked examples. It emerges from the total absence of counterexamples. Defenders will again invoke non-interference. Humanity needed organic development. Premature intervention would attract chaos. The species had to earn its own survival. Except the Emperor was never a passive observer bound by cosmic principle. He made a bargain with the Chaos Gods at Molech. He created the Thunder Warriors. He engineered 20 Primarchs using stolen warp knowledge. He planned and launched a galactic crusade of conquest that would reshape every human world in the galaxy. Every one of those was direct, aggressive intervention in the trajectory of human civilization. Restraint appeared only when suffering advanced nothing on his private ledger. Intervention appeared when he needed something: power from chaos, soldiers for conquest, a galaxy reorganized to his specifications. The consistency of that pattern across 40 millennia is a procurement schedule with human misery as acceptable overhead. His own doctrine makes this doubly damning. The imperial truth was a vision of scientific rationalism that explicitly denied the existence of gods and the supernatural. Authority derived from capability rather than divinity. That was the stated principle. Yet the imperium he built became, within a single generation of his incapacitation, a theocratic nightmare sustained by what one scholarly overview describes as unthinking devotion to the God-Emperor of mankind and his representatives, hatred of all that is different. An immortal atheist became a god because the civilization he personally designed couldn't function without worship. Every structural choice pointed toward that dependency. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that made warp navigation possible across the galaxy, required the Emperor's personal power to function. Space Marine legions were engineered for obedience to a command structure that terminated at one individual. The Primarchs themselves were created not as independent leaders capable of governing without their father, but as instruments shaped for specific roles in a machine only the Emperor fully understood. He built a galaxy that couldn't exist without him, and the collapse that followed his incapacitation was the entirely predictable result of an architecture designed around a single point of failure by the architect himself. His treatment of the Primarchs, 20 genetically engineered sons created using power bargained from chaos at Molech, seals this charge with granular evidence. Given legions of transhuman space marines to command, they were subjected to a combination of manipulation, emotional neglect, and outright cruelty that virtually guaranteed rebellion. Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, devoted his life to worshipping the Emperor as a god. Lorgar's reward was public humiliation on a scale designed to break him. Forced to kneel amid the ruins of a city the Emperor had ordered destroyed. The explicit lesson? Worship is forbidden. The implicit message? Your devotion means nothing. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Sons, was a powerful psyker. When Magnus learned of Horus's betrayal, he used sorcery to try to warn the Emperor, breaking the Emperor's own decree against sorcery. Magnus broke the rules to save the Imperium. He was punished for it. That decree deserves scrutiny because it encapsulates the Emperor's governing philosophy in miniature. The being who issued it was, himself, the most powerful psyker in existence. He wielded psychic power as the foundation of everything he built. He maintained an entire project, the creation of the Primarchs, built on knowledge extracted from warp entities at Molech. He undertook the Webway project beneath the Imperial Palace, and then he stood before his sons and told them that doing what he himself did was forbidden to them. The hypocrisy wasn't subtle, it was structural. The Emperor reserved for himself every tool he denied to the people who needed those tools to survive the threats he knew were coming. The decree wasn't a philosophical position. It was a monopoly on power dressed up as moral law. Both Lorgar and Magnus fell to chaos as a direct result of the Emperor's treatment. Their falls were proximate causes of the Horus Heresy, the civil war that destroyed the Imperium's golden age and shattered an empire 2 centuries of crusading had built. Primarchs turned traitor. Space Marine legions followed them into rebellion. Billions died. And the war that put the Emperor on the Golden Throne was the direct, predictable consequence of his secrecy, his double dealing with chaos, his treatment of his sons as numbered projects rather than people, and his decision to withhold the one piece of knowledge that might have inoculated them against corruption, that chaos was real, that it was seductive, and that even their father had once knelt before it. Master of Mankind, Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Horus Heresy novel, providing some of the most significant direct characterization of the Emperor, presents a being of cold pragmatism who viewed his creations as tools. The text doesn't bury this in subtext. It renders it as direct characterization, a portrait of a ruler whose vision for humanity had no room for the humanity of the individuals serving that vision. Charge 3. The Perpetual's Dirty Secret. 10,000 years, 1,000 psykers per day fed into the Golden Throne to sustain the Astronomicon and maintain the Emperor's existence in his shattered state after his wounding at the heresy's climax. The math is simple, and the math is monstrous. 1,000 souls per day, 365 days per year, 10,000 years, 3.65 billion human beings. Psychically gifted individuals, identified and collected from across the Imperium by the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, transported to Terra, fed into the throne's mechanisms, their life force consumed to keep one being functioning. 3.65 billion souls burned to ash in the service of a government that calls itself humanity's protector. Each of those psykers was a person, born on some world they'd never see again once the black ships came, collected and transported across the galaxy in conditions of misery and terror, and then consumed. Their life force drained to fuel the beacon and sustain the Emperor's broken body on the throne, ritually destroyed so that the Astronomicon does not go dark. They are fuel, cataloged and expended with the same bureaucratic indifference the Imperium applies to ammunition requisitions. The Emperor is a perpetual. Perpetuals die and come back. Vulkan proved this under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Killed again and again by Conrad Kurz, burned alive, atomized, subjected to every form of destruction imaginable, and returned each time. Ollanius Pius carried the same gift across millennia. The mechanism is established canon, demonstrated repeatedly, and not disputed within the fictional universe. So why can't the Emperor simply die on the Golden Throne and resurrect in a healed body? The defense has answers. The warp rift sealed beneath the Imperial Palace, a tear in reality that the throne helps contain, would rupture if the Emperor died. Terra itself would become a demon world. The Astronomicon would fail, stranding Imperial fleets across the galaxy, collapsing interstellar navigation, severing the Imperium's ability to function as a coherent civilization. Real stakes. The prosecution doesn't dismiss them, but follow the chain of causation backward. The Emperor built the infrastructure that created every one of these dependencies. He centralized an entire galaxy's navigation around a single psychic beacon powered by one individual, himself. He made the bargain at Molech that set in motion the events leading to the heresy, which led to his wounding, which led to the throne. He chose, during the Great Crusade, to construct the Imperium's government, military, and interstellar logistics around systems requiring his personal psychic output to function. Every link in the chain that supposedly traps him was forged by his own decisions. The cage is real. Its builder sits inside it. Robute Guilliman, the resurrected Primarch of the Ultramarines, was granted an audience with the Emperor in the 41st millennium, an event widely discussed across lore communities, though the specific details of what passed between them in Guy Haley's Dark Imperium and Godblight novels await independent textual verification. Earlier editions introduced the Star Child theory, an older piece of lore, partially retconned but never fully eliminated, suggesting that the emperor's soul could be reborn, that his death on the throne would represent transformation rather than extinction. But the question it raised never went away, and Gilliman's audience only sharpened it. Is the emperor choosing to remain on the throne? Strip away the mythology. Strip away 10 millennia of accumulated theology and institutional inertia. What remains is a government built by one being, around one being, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 people to that being, ruled in the name of that being, and justified by the claim that this being can't be allowed to die, even though his own biological nature includes the proven ability to die and regenerate. If perpetual resurrection works, and the canon provides no demonstrated reason it wouldn't for him specifically, then every psyker consumed by the Golden Throne died to sustain a being who didn't need sustaining. 3.65 billion lives fed into a machine whose operator could have stepped out at any point across 10,000 years. The prosecution rests. Across 48,000 years of documented existence, the Emperor of Mankind had the power, the knowledge, and the immortality to prevent every catastrophe humanity suffered. The Men of Iron revolt, the Age of Strife, and the Horus Heresy that put him on the throne in the first place. He chose inaction when intervention served no personal objective, and he chose intervention only when the outcome advanced his own designs. He preached atheism while making deals with gods. He demanded loyalty while engineering the conditions for betrayal. He built a government that couldn't survive without him, then filled the resulting vacuum with a theocracy sustained by human sacrifice on an industrial scale. And he sat on a golden chair for 10,000 years, fed on the souls of the psychically gifted, possessing in his very biology the power to end the cycle at any time. He didn't. The Emperor of Mankind isn't humanity's savior rotting on a throne. He's humanity's captor sitting on one. Hundreds of publications built this case. Nobody prosecuted it. The evidence has been there all along. The verdict is yours. Drop it in the comments. And if you want more cases built from evidence the lore tries to bury, subscribe.